This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, this is the Paul Gottfried moment brought by the Glazov Gang. My topic today is the conservative movement then and now. And what I would like to do is compare and contrast the conservative wars of the 1980s, one in which I was directly involved, with the present ascension on the American right. One obvious similarity is that in the 1980s and in the present war between the pro- and anti-Trump forces in the American conservative movement, the neoconservatives have been a dominant element. In the 1980s, the neoconservatives were able to occupy most of the positions of importance within the conservative movement and managed over a period of years to marginalize their opposition on the right. Their opposition, for better or worse, has been called the paleoconservatives or the old right, which by 1990s was clearly in decline. They lost their media resources. In fact, they had very little access to the media. They were in a dwindling financial and public relations position. And what aided the neoconservative takeover of the American conservative movement was the active cooperation of the liberal left media, which I think correctly saw in the neoconservatives a less, a less determined and a less radical opposition than they would have faced from an older and, less congenial right. The neoconservatives use their positions, I think, as David Goldman or Spengler has pointed out, to ruthlessly suppress their opposition, to drive people out of the conservative movement, to marginalize them, and having suffered the full fury of this attempt to marginalize opposition, I can speak for the impressive powers they were able to bring to bear against their opponents. They also were able to establish effective working relations with the establishment Republican Party, and in the later years of the Reagan administration, and certainly throughout the administration of George W. Bush, they held dominant positions, particularly as foreign policy advisors. They also were active in supporting John McCain and then later Mitt Romney. And I think in this recent primary cycle, the candidate that they were perhaps hoping would win the nomination, the person on whom they placed their earliest hopes, was probably Jeb Bush. He failed, and then it became, in the end, a kind of anybody but Trump effort. When Trump won the nomination, these people became extremely distraught and have waged a battle sniping against him, trying to blacken his reputation, and generally saying many of the same things against him that have come from the liberal left and from the media in general. What makes this very different from the 1980s is that this time the neoconservatives do not enjoy the overwhelming power that they had 30 years ago. For one thing, they've lost many of the older generation of the neoconservatives who are now part of the anti-Trump forces, and the never-Trump people are largely establishment Republicans, and the younger neoconservatives, whom I have nicknamed the mini-cons, because they usually inherit their positions from the older generation and show very little talent of their own. These people still have tremendous resources. They are dominant at the Wall Street Journal, National Review, Weekly Standard. They seem to be ubiquitous on Fox News. On the other hand, there have been enormous defections, and one could imagine that if Donald Trump were to win the presidency, these people would be in diminished circumstances. They certainly would not enjoy the kind of good relations to the White House that they had under the administration of George W. Bush, and which they certainly would have had in the Romney presidency. In addition to that, I think they have created so much bad blood on the right by opposing Trump as vehemently as they have, and in some cases, some conspicuously supporting Hillary Clinton, that it is hard to see, how they will have the same degree of control of the American right that they did in the 1980s, particularly if Trump wins the presidential race. Now, if he loses the presidential race, which is a possibility, I would think that they also would be working in diminished circumstances, although they would try to say, we warned you that this man was a disaster, you shouldn't nominate him. What would inevitably happen is that everybody on the right who had supported Trump would say that, you contributed to his defeat, particularly if the election results indicate a near win on the part of Trump, which I think is at this point looks likely, even if he were to lose. So I think that the neoconservatives 1 year hence will not be in the position that they enjoyed in the 1980s and in the 30 years that followed. I would also think that one of the effects of their somewhat diminished power is that we would receive a very different narrative about the history of the conservative movement. As I've indicated in my own histories of the American conservative movement, purges have been a permanent feature. People keep getting thrown off the bus, to use the graphic phrase of Jonah Goldberg, and the reason they are thrown off the bus is usually falsified in subsequent historical accounts. I think that much of this will change, particularly if the neoconservatives will have to face an opposition on the right, which does not give them the authority to determine the historical narrative and to determine conservative policy in the way that they've enjoyed since the late 1980s. I don't want to go on and on. As most people know, I can speak for many hours on this topic, and I filled entire books with my views about the subject. In any case, I hope that this afternoon's discussion will be well received, and I would ask all of you to please support the Glazov Gang at jamieglaze.com, and make sure you subscribe to this Glazov Gang YouTube channel. Thank you.